Okay. G'day, everybody. Here we are with Coach Anna Lorimer, Dr. Anna Lorimer. I'll let Anna introduce herself because there's a lot to her to her title, so I don't want to get it wrong. But Anna's been a very, very long-term athlete of foot traffic, and she's also now a very, very long-term coach of foot traffic athletes as well. So, a vital part of the member of the team, and she's an expert in a lot of fields. So really happy to have Anna on this discussion. And you'll note that this is basically we're basically going over points that Anna put together in an article for us about fueling for an Ironman. So I'll add the article link to the notes, and people can check that out, the original document, if they want to. But otherwise, sit back and enjoy. So thanks, Anna. Tell us about yourself.
So I have a PhD in sport and exercise science, specialising in biomechanics, but I have an interest in all kinds of science, geeky stuff. And I do actually have an undergraduate in chemistry. So I did quite a lot of physiology and stuff in my undergraduate. And so that's kind of where my background is. I will hazard that I'm not a nutritionist, so that I don't come with that expertise, but I have played around a lot with the fueling side of things because I've got probably the grumpiest guts you'll ever come across. They don't like racing and fueling at the same time. So I've done quite a lot of research into this side of things over the years of racing, which has been quite a lot for now. So yeah, that's where my interest comes from.
That's great. And the thing that we find is a lot of the stuff the coaches and the athletes know before the scientists have put into papers. So a lot of what Anna says is stuff that she's experimented with and finds what works. And you'll see that a lot of this information comes out as research papers and a few years down the track. So yeah, it's really up to date knowledge.
Yeah, so I might put in a few little tidbits where I say this is stuff that I would do or recommend for my athletes if they come to me when they say that they do struggle with gastrointestinal problems, whereas other people who don't struggle with it, they can follow the guidelines and they can challenge it. So I do have some athletes who can eat really huge amounts when they're racing, and then other ones who struggle, and so we have to be a little bit more tailored with what we do. But it all comes down to practicing what you do, what you're going to do beforehand, and we'll touch on that in a little bit. So the first thing, the things that I kind of talk about in the article are looking at how much carbohydrates to take on board and why that we need to take on carbohydrates. And so to start off with, we don't really have that much glycogen. So glycogen is our stored carbohydrates that we carry around in our muscle and our liver. And that's only about 700 grams. And we can't actually use all 700 grams either when it comes to race day. The rest of our energy has to come from either breaking down fats or proteins. We don't really want to break down those proteins because that's our muscle. That's what's going to make us go. So we don't really want to be breaking that down. But the harder we work, the more we're going to rely on those carbohydrates. And so the quicker we're going to run through our glycogen. So when you're the further up the field you're wanting to be in your Ironman, the quicker you're going to run through that glycogen. And so we need to be topping that up because we know we're going to be out there for more than 2 hours when it comes to an Ironman. And so we need to be taking on carbohydrates. And so we need to be aware of how much to take on. So originally the recommendations were 30 to 60 grams per hour of carbohydrates. And that came down to the fact that the research found that we can't actually burn more than 60 grams of any type of carbohydrate. So if I was taking on 60 grams of glucose per hour, that's the maximum that I can burn in an hour.
So just as context, that's basically 3 joules per hour, isn't it?
Yes. So, and that's generally what most people would probably aim for in a race. the rate limiting step is not actually how much we can burn, it's how quickly we can absorb it through our intestines. And the reason why it's so we've got in our intestines, we've got these receptors or these proteins which are specific for glucose. And that specific receptor is known as the SGLT1 receptor, and that's the protein, and that takes.
Duke's arguing with that one, actually. He disagrees with that. Anyway, we know what his eating habits are like.
That takes that glucose from the intestines and basically takes it into the blood, so the blood can take it around to our exercising muscles. And that is the thing that is slowing it down. If you take on more than 60 grams of glucose, then the rest of the glucose is just going to sit inside your intestines. And that's when we start to get those gastrointestinal problems, or you might have had those sloshy gut feelings. And that's basically because you've got a whole lot of sugar sitting in your intestines, and the best case scenario is that it's just sitting there with a whole lot of water in there, and it's not promoting dragging the water across into your blood as well. Because when we absorb when we absorb sugar and salts and things into our blood, it pulls water in with it. So if we're not absorbing it, the water is going to sit in our gut with it. And worst case scenario, it's actually going to pull the water out of our blood and into our gut.
Okay, so here's a question. If you're cycling or running in an Ironman and you feel you've overfueled, you've got too much, and you've taken on too many calories, too many carbohydrates, what do you reckon is the best thing to do? Like, what would you tell people to do?
I've actually had this question. One of not our athletes, but someone we've trained with. I was working at one of the aid stations at New Zealand Ironman, and he came running past and he goes, Anna, I've got this sloshy gut feeling. What do I do? And I was like, next 2 aid stations, ice and water, that's it. No Coke, nothing. Wow. And then get back onto your fueling system. So just go for the water, basically dilute it all down, allow your body to absorb it, and then get back onto your fueling strategy. So if you're feeling like you're overloaded, you can just miss one aid station, miss one fueling block in terms of your strategy. See if that sorts it out, and then get back onto your fueling strategy.
What about, and I guess one thing I suppose could work as well is just backing off the intensity a little bit. Just the easier you work, the quicker, easier it is to digest.
Yeah, because materials. The other thing is if we're working really, really hard, we're actually directing some of the blood away from our intestines and to our muscles. So it does make it harder for our body to absorb it, particularly by the time we get to the run. So that's the back end of the run is generally when you start to have these problems, is because everything is starting to shut down a little bit, because we are pretty much trying to kill ourselves. We're trying to take ourselves to that point just before then. And so the body is starting to go, hang on a second, what are you trying to do to me? And so it's starting to struggle a little bit. So yeah, so backing up the intensity a little bit can actually help as well.
And another thing I think is quite relevant to Ironman New Zealand, but I'm sure it's the same, and I think in Kona it's probably similar as well, is a lot of the aid stations that we have just happen to be placed immediately before a hill. And certainly on a run course, there's aid stations, within a couple hundred meters of going uphill. And the harder you work, the harder it is to fuel. And so I guess course knowledge becomes so important, because it might be that you decide at that aid station that's prior to the hill, all you do is you take on that water and ice, and you just maybe miss those carbs.
Or so I actually have I have a really strict fueling strategy. So I time it. It's programmed into my watch. The alarm goes, I take my fuel. I have that fuel that happens when that alarm goes, and it doesn't matter whether I'm in an aid station or not. I take the fuel on then, and then I get the water at the aid station, or I get the water and Coke at the aid station. So I always have everything based on time, and it doesn't matter what's happening. But then I'm going to wash it down with water once I get to the aid station.
So are you running with a bottle?
No, I used to, but I don't anymore. But I fuel with blocks on the run now, and they're a little bit easier to deal with in terms of that side of things, rather than gels. Gels are a little bit harder. But that comes down to how frequently you're going to be taking on board the carbohydrates as well. And I'll talk about that a little bit later as well. So the recommendations of what they found, so that's just if we're taking on board one type of carbohydrate. So glucose is our preferred type of carbohydrate for our muscles to burn. It's really, really easy for our muscles to turn glucose into energy. Basically, because of the way it works, glucose is a 6-carbon carbohydrate, and we need to basically turn it into 3-carbon carbohydrates. What a number of people have found, and I've put some links in the article to a sports nutrition expert who's done a lot of research, and he has some really good blog posts and some really good, just easy to understand infographics which have been put together. You can follow him on Instagram as well, and I'll put a link to his Instagram on the article as well. And what they found is that actually, if you look at what some of the elite cyclists are doing, and there's even some examples of some of your top athletes at Kona doing this, is they're taking on board more than that 60 grams of carbohydrates per hour. And that's actually improving their performance. But the key thing for that is that in order for us to avoid those gastrointestinal problems, is that we need to be having a mixture of carbohydrate types. So we need to be having glucose, that's our primary carbohydrate. So 60 grams per hour of glucose. And then we want to have another type of carbohydrate, and that's generally fructose. And so this is where this is the science behind the 2-to-1 fructose ratio that you tend to see advertised on some of our different sports drinks and sports gels that we have. Morton has brought out one which is a 1 to 0.8 ratio. So that means you can have even a little bit more of that carbohydrates if you can tolerate it. As a result of this research, they've actually trialed it in cyclists and runners, and they've found that you can tolerate up to about 90 grams per hour of carbohydrates. And that will improve your performance because you are able to basically create more energy for your muscles to be able to burn.
Am I able to just go into a dairy and get 2 bottles of Gatorade and double what I would normally have in an hour? Why can't I do that?
It basically depends on the ratios that are in that drink. And so I've on the article, I've done a table of a number of common different types of sports drinks, gels, chews, and bars, and looked at what their ratios are, what the different types of carbohydrates are. Some of them are just using predominantly glucose. Now, if it's glucose, if it's maltodextrose, or if it's sucrose, it all behaves the same way. Okay. So it's all basically, your body has seen it as glucose. So it needs to have any of those types of glucose products, as well as some kind of fructose in there.
Right.
So when it comes to whole food, and by all means, if you want to use whole food, there's nothing saying that you can't. It's just a little bit harder to figure out what those ratios are. But anything that's got like your dried fruits or things in it, that's going to have some of those fructose in it. So we are going to have some ratios where we've got a higher level of fructose in it. So there's a few of the bars and a few of the Cliff products where they've used, say, tapioca syrup and rice bran syrup. So those syrups are basically, they've taken tapioca starch or rice bran, and they've digested it with an enzyme. So we don't actually know what the ratios are. Well, they might know what the ratios are. I can't tell from the label what the ratios are. Because it depends on how the enzyme has broken it down as to whether it's broken it down into predominantly glucose or a ratio of glucose and fructose. So they're a little bit harder to tell what those ratios are as well. Whereas the ones who have actually advertised, here, I've done a 2-to-1 ratio, or I've done a 1 to 0.5, 1 to 0.8 ratio. Those are the ones we know which have deliberately put in the fructose to give us these ratios to work with.
Right.
But some people like to have some solid food because, you know, you're out there all day, you can get hungry. And so you might want to have some solid food. The thing to be aware of, if you're having real food or the bars, is that the higher the protein and the fat content in those bars, is it is going to slow down the absorption of the carbohydrates a bit. So the more fat and protein there is in there, the slower that absorption is going to be. So you might want to couple that with something that's really high or quickly absorbing. So something like a drink or a gel, which is predominantly glucose based. So it absorbs really quickly.
So do you think like just your everyday muesli bar is going to suffice, or do you actually need to go down the technical energy bar line for that?
I think you can get away with the everyday muesli bars to a point, but you do need to kind of be aware of how much carbohydrates you're getting from them.
Yeah. Okay.
So it is about just kind of looking at the nutrition information. So it's that total carbohydrates you're looking at. In terms of how much of the total carbohydrates, and then the sugars is the simple sugars. So that tells us how much are the quickly absorbing carbohydrates which are in there. And then if you've got a muesli bar that has honey in it, that's going to have a higher fructose content in it because honey is high in fructose. If you've got a muesli bar that has those dried fruits and things in it, that's going to have a slightly higher fructose content than one that's just kind of oats based, or oats and golden syrup or whatever. Okay. So it's kind of having a bit of an awareness. The thing with the sports specific stuff, yes, it's a bit more expensive, but we know what's in it, and it makes it so much easier to track how much we're getting. So it makes it easier to plan that fueling and your nutrition.
So do you recommend that I don't go as cheap as I can and try and minimize my expenses on sports fuel in my training, and just wait till race day and then I can splurge out? Or do I need to spend money in the months and months prior to my race to use this stuff?
Yeah, so that kind of brings me to one of the questions that often comes up when I talk about this higher volume, or this higher number of aiming for 90 grams per hour. So one of my athletes actually posted her fueling strategy over a half Ironman recently, like I think it was Sunny Coast last year. And she got a lot of response back from the community going, oh my goodness, that is so much. Like, how do you eat that much, sort of thing? And she was like, I train like that. And that's the thing. So we often joke about nutrition being like the fourth discipline, and you can actually train your gut as well. So it is actually part of the discipline. So you can start between 5 to 10 weeks out, and I would, depending, obviously it depends on your bank account. It also depends on how nervous you are about it, I guess. And you want to slowly build up how much carbohydrates you are giving your intestines, basically, because our body is actually really, really good at responding to what we give it. Like, we train, our muscles get bigger and stronger. If I give my intestines more carbohydrates, it's going to go, well, I need to respond to these higher carbohydrates. So it puts more of those proteins, which transport the carbohydrates into the intestine cell wall, so I can transport more carbohydrates across. So if I train and it just needs to be those big brick sessions. So your big Saturday or your big Sunday sessions where you're using more similar to your race day fueling strategy, and you're building up towards your race day fueling strategy. And you do really want to have practiced a full race day fueling strategy at least 2 to 3 times, because you want to know, one, that you can carry it all if you need to carry it all, if you're not going to pull off the course, and 2, that you can get it all down, 3, that your body can cope with it, so that you're not going to get these gastrointestinal issues. The other thing to bear in mind is if you are doing this gut training, so training your gut to cope with higher levels of carbohydrates, you can't then be doing a low carbohydrate diet for the rest of the week, because basically you're trying to tell your gut, absorb more carbohydrates. So if you then do it for the rest of the week where you're not giving it carbohydrates, you're basically negating that hard work you did on the weekend.
That's so good advice.
It's not go crazy. You don't have to have a really high carbohydrate diet. It's just don't go really low carbohydrates over the week, because that's just going to negate everything that you've done.
If people are umming and ahhing about the expense of that, then just put into context, $1,000 spent on nutrition will probably make you go a lot faster than $1,000 spent on a new helmet and a skin suit and aero socks, and all these things that people see and people will be impressed with. But what people don't see is your fueling strategy. And if you spent the money and invested in it, and you invest a lot in the sport, and if that large investment is in your fueling, then you know you're going to get to the finish line in much better shape faster.
Yeah,
and that's what will impress people more.
The more confidence you have in that fueling strategy. Whereas like the suits and stuff, that there's something that you don't need to have as much confidence in. Whereas particularly if you've had a bad experience, and most people have had a race where they've had something go wrong, where they've felt sick, where they've where they've underfueled and felt nauseous, where you've overfueled and felt nauseous, something has happened where they've had some sort of fueling issue. So that's one of those things where you are generally nervous about it. And so you want to have confidence in your strategy. You want to have it nailed into place. You want to go, this is what I'm going to do at this time. This is how I'm going to do it. It just needs to be second nature. The other thing to be aware of is that by the time you get onto the run, and particularly the second half of the run, as Kelly would put it, you're a bit doolally. Like you're not thinking straight. So things you start to have weird and wonderful thoughts, and you want to be able to go, no, I just have to do this. I just have to do this. I just have to do this. Rather than humming and hawing about what I'm going to do. It's not about making decisions. You don't take this and I'm going to decide on what I'm going to eat. You just go, I'm eating this, I'm eating this, I'm eating this, I'm eating this.
So that's a really good thing, man. It brings me to a question that I've often wondered about. Do you see any reason do you prefer people to drip feed across the duration of the race, or do you like people who front load when they're feeling their best, freshest on the bike, to try and get as much of those calories and those carbohydrates in as they can, so later on when maybe they do miss the odd aid station, they do fall off that cliff a little bit, they're not already down at the depths?
It really does depend on the athlete. So it is easier to get your calories in on the bike. So definitely have a really solid fueling strategy on the bike, and that is the time when you cannot miss a fueling gateway sort of thing, because it is a lot harder to get in enough nutrition on the run. And we know that, like, particularly if a part of your nutrition strategy is going to be Coke, then who knows how much of that goes into you. It's like throw it at my face and hope some goes in my mouth sort of thing. So we want to be able to know that we've got a lot on board during the bike, so that when I get off and I'm going to go on to my run, I'm in a good place with my nutrition. So I definitely would make sure that the bike is a place where you know your nutrition is really, really good. And that's also a place where if you are going to have problems with gastrointestinal problems, it's going to happen on the run more than on the bike. So you probably could aim for those higher levels on the bike, and then maybe if you're a little bit worried, go for slightly lower levels on the run, because it can be hard to get that amount in. The other thing is to be aware of is, so I tend to go for slightly more of a drip feed type of approach, because, as I said, I have the grumpiest guts in the world, and I fuel rigidly every 15 minutes. So on the bike, on the run every 15 minutes, and I have a certain amount that I'm taking on every 15 minutes. And it is measured out, it's marked on my bottles, and then it's 2 blocks every 15 minutes so that I get a certain amount, and I know exactly how much I'm getting every time. So it just depends on how you're going to go about it. And so people who struggle a little bit with problems with the gastrointestinal, I tend to go for more of a smaller amounts, but very often, because it's just taking the pressure off a little bit. Whereas other people who can take on board a whole gel and not have an issue, then we can spread it out a little bit more. Okay. Because the problem with having it so often is we do run the risk of carb fatigue. Yeah. So the other thing to be aware of when we're taking on so much carbohydrates is that you are having sweet stuff for 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, whatever it is, hours. And so you do have to be aware of the fact that you are going to run into issues of getting sick of flavors. There are so many flavors that I cannot go near, like vanilla. No, don't ever go near me with that.
You would hate the old Perpetuum orange vanilla flavor. And when it got warm in Kona, it was the worst thing I ever drunk in my life. I had to just chuck the whole bottle out. I couldn't stand it.
I had one gel at Rock, which because we had to hand the bottles in early the day before, it actually fermented and it bubbled as it came out. I was like,
oh, no.
So these are all things to be aware of and knowing the course, because it was just something that didn't come across, didn't even feature, because I didn't realize that I handed in my special needs the day before at Rock. So there's all these sorts of things to just be aware of when it comes to your fueling strategy, and then having those backups to be able to back it up. When you're practicing your fueling strategy, don't use your favorite flavor all the time, because by race day, you're probably going to hate your favorite flavor. The other thing to be aware of is I often tell my athletes if you're going to use electrolytes, then have 1 bottle of electrolytes for every 1 bottle of water. Okay. So the electrolytes, they do add electrolytes to your gels and your blocks and things like that. So technically we probably don't need to be taking on electrolytes. But the thing with electrolytes and the salt in particular is that it makes it really easy to drink. And particularly if you're racing in a hot, humid climate like at Kona, you want to be stimulated to want to drink. And so that's where the electrolyte drinks come in real handy, is that they make you want to drink more of it. But again, most of them are sweet, whether it's because they've got sweetness added to them or because they've got a small amount of carbohydrates. Don't rely on those carbohydrates as your carbohydrate source, because it's a very small amount. But they are still sweet. And so you want to have something to wash that sweetness out of your mouth. I actually put a little bit of salt in my water because I am weird, apparently. But I use that slightly salty water to wash the sticky sweetness out of my mouth. Again, it's just about trying to dull that carb fatigue down a little bit. So just, again, it's about playing around with different strategies. Having something else in your pocket that is like a Marmite sandwich or like salted potato or something like that, just something that is completely not sweet, so that if you just really can't fathom putting another gel in your mouth, you have something with carbohydrates that you can eat. Because there are times when you just cannot swallow another gel. So there's those things to be aware of as well. And remembering it's about trying to minimize all those little irritations. So thinking about when you're out training, particularly when you're practicing your fueling strategy and you're training, think about all the things that irritate you, because you want to try and minimize those on race day, because they're going to irritate you so much more on race day.
That's really good stuff. So, okay, so someone's wanting to tighten up a little bit on their fueling. The best thing you would recommend at this stage is calculate what 60 grams of carbs in an hour will be, and maybe this weekend when you go out on your long ride, start using that and make some notes about how you felt, how you ran off the bike, and then just work up from there. And you might find that your magic number is 105 and you stick to it. But yeah, take the time. And the good thing is with people that are doing late year Ironmans or into next year's Ironmans, there was plenty of time to do that. If you're racing an Ironman in 3 weeks' time, it's probably not the best.
Yeah.
But I know a lot of our listeners here have a long-term goal for Ironman races, so they're prepared to put the time in to get that right. That's really good, Anna. That's some awesome advice. And I've been doing the sport for a long time, but I still learn stuff. And as you've mentioned a few things which I hadn't really thought of before as well. So I'm hoping that everybody who watches this and listens to this will take some of that on board and find something that will improve their fueling strategy. It's
been a pleasure, and I hope it's helpful for somebody.
It will be. Thanks so much. Well, I look forward to doing another one of these. We'll find another topic, and this one actually came through from one of our members who asked me for some tips on Ironman fueling, and I thought a great opportunity to, rather than just go back with a simple response from me, let's put this into a call like this. So if anybody has some other questions that they'd like answered by either Anna, myself, or some of our other expert coaches, then please comment. Send me a comment and send me a message, and I will put it on the list of things to do, because I think this is really, really valuable information. So thanks so much. We'll see you later.
Yeah.